Hi there, it's Rick Hansen with Amazing Greats, and today we talk with Jimmy Pena, an icon in the fitness world for years. He's the face of Muscle and Fitness magazine for decades, has written thousands of articles on fitness. He's been involved with the writing of 9 books, 2 of them New York Times bestsellers, and always a man of God. But this is the story of how his relationship with his creator took a dramatic change. Same amazing guy, but 2 lives. And we uncover them both on this episode of Amazing Greats. Jimmy, it is so great to see you. So great to have you on the podcast. Thank you for being here.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much for asking.
Well, let's first of all, for those of you who are not of our audience who's not familiar with Jimmy Pena, I kind of, as a metaphor, was trying to position your life in 2 chapters. Like there's this chapter 1 and then there's chapter 2. And then as I started thinking about it, it's like more like 2 different volumes. I mean, there's 2 different books here. It's Jimmy Pena 1.0 and Jimmy Pena 2.0. And so that's where we're gonna start, is with where you built your platform in terms of a national presence and a fan base, if you will, back in the early days. So you just give us the kind of the early resume of what Jimmy Pena was all about in the early days.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned second chapter or second volume. I like the idea of second mountains, second, in fact, the number 2 is an interesting number that I've used, throughout the ministry and the career. But yeah, so there's been two halves, if you will, and I'm gloriously in the second half, which is great. But yeah, I started out in mainstream fitness, actually. So I'm from Texas. My wife and I are both from Texas. Went to Baylor for undergrad. I did my master's in the University of Texas system, and have a master's degree in clinical exercise physiology. And so I was all into strength and conditioning, and I was very serious about it. And I wrote a thesis on the effects of endurance training on muscle size and strength in competitive weightlifters. And so I was in that mode. In fact, one of my first leadership appointments was I was the strength and conditioning director at a place called the Tom Landry Sports Science Center in Dallas, and had a wonderful team and a great staff, and just hard charging hospitality and leadership while helping people stay healthy, and kind of cutting my teeth in those realms. And then all the while, in fact, I started writing fitness magazines and fitness articles freelance for a magazine in Los Angeles called Muscle and Fitness Magazine. I'm old enough to know that we used to actually go to the newsstands and find magazines and get excited to see the latest magazine. So slow when you think about it. It was so slow. It took 6 weeks for a magazine to come out.
Yeah.
But so I was freelancing on the weekends, writing these articles, and
incidentally, you kind of hooked up with them in Seattle. I'm from Seattle. We're recording here from Seattle, and you hooked up with Muscle Magazine in Seattle at one point, right?
That's right. So I was actually presenting that thesis at the American College of Sports Medicine conference. And so Seattle was very near and dear to my heart. I was presenting that, and then a team from M&F came up and said, "Hey, take us through your thesis." And I did. And they said, "Would you like to be a freelance writer for us?" So that's how the freelance gig started. So I started writing for Flex magazines and Muscle Fitness and Hers and all sorts of different opportunities. And then a few years later, they invited me to LA to be the worldwide fitness editor for that label. And so, yeah, one of my big breaks, so to speak, was serving under the leadership of Joe Weider. And Joe Weider, some listeners may not know, some may recognize that name, but Joe Weider was like one of the founders of bodybuilding and fitness, and they called him the Master Blaster. And he found Arnold and all the great old bodybuilders of the day. And so Joe Weider invited me to be a part of his
Wow.
staff. So
Wow.
so that's what actually brought us west. Ultimately, was to be to be a freelance writer. Yeah.
Maybe ended up to be the most published muscle and fitness writer in the country at that point in time, correct? And you were like you attracted some of the people from Hollywood who wanted your assistance in preparing themselves for movies, and including Mario Lopez and LL Cool J and who else? Tyler Perry. Wow, you were the top of the top at that point.
It was interesting. I couldn't believe I would be tapped on the shoulder to write these books or get people ready for magazine covers or movies. And, you know, it happened so fast. So I became that guy. I was just writing and writing and writing and serving where I could, and gig to gig to gig, infomercials and all over the fitness realm. And yeah, we were just hard charging. And I did that for a few years until 2009 actually was the last in-house opportunity. It was right after the '08 housing crisis, and businesses all over California and all over the country, I suppose, the world, were making modifications, and they ended up moving to New York. And a lot of us older editors were laid off and given packages, which happened to be a huge blessing. I didn't know if I knew it at the time, but it became a huge blessing, because my wife and I, we started what we called Prayfit, a blog. In fact, I was laid off on a Friday, and then on that Monday we started writing what we call fitness devotions back then. This is before faith and fitness. The hashtag faith and fitness was was around. We started writing faith and fitness, which we can get into, which is kind of weird to say, but yeah. So I
Well,
started writing fitness articles that had some meaning and humor and depth to them, and so just kind of fashioned those things together and pretty much didn't look back.
but faith wasn't new to you at this point. Faith started with in eighth grade, as I understand it, right? So in eighth grade, walk us through how you found Jesus and how that all started too.
So I became a believer back in Texas, little at the time it was a little Baptist church there in Texas, and so I committed my life to Christ at an early age, and so
Did that happen like in an altar call, or was it through a group of friends, or how did that work?
it was an altar call situation. I mean, I grew up in church, didn't really understand, but then one day the Holy Spirit spoke to my heart, and I said, you know what? I don't know, and I want to commit my life to Jesus, and I became a Christian. I think I have learned in the past 40 years, what that meant, as you grow in grace, you know. But yes, I do look to the eighth grade as a time where it clicked with me that, you know what, I want to be a Christian, I want to follow Christ, and so yes. My relationship with the Lord was very important to me in high school. I got involved with FCA. I was committed at church, and went to college, committed to the Lord, and so it's always been important.
So did you see the Lord's presence in this kind of spiral up the first mountain of success? Did you see along the way God's presence and God's guidance?
Oh, of course I did. Whether it be with the successes, but also failures and pitfalls on the way up, that quote unquote that first mountain of success. I did feel, and we may have touched on this before in previous conversations, we may have read about, but I did feel this emptiness as I was in that whole field of fitness. I did feel a conviction. I felt a hollowness in what I was doing and what I was writing about, and it got old, and it got kind of, I don't know, it got a little icky in my mind.
Yeah.
In fact, I forget which book I wrote this story into, but I reached out to a pastor, Louis Giglio, who I met at Baylor when he was leading a Bible study at Baylor. And I sent him an email. I said, Louis, I really want to make an impact for the Lord in my area of expertise. And he, as Louis often is, he's so sharp in very few words. And he said, Jimmy, embrace your smallness. He said, in an industry where size is king, really embracing your smallness is where you're going to make the most impact. And yeah, he at the time he might as well have been speaking another language that I didn't understand, because I was so about size and strength and thinking that, hey, to honor God, you've got to be fit, you've got to be strong, and it's a the old my fitness is my witness type of cliche. Oh, just to even say that, it puts a weird taste in my mouth. No one really knows me, so they don't know why that's such a bad taste in my mouth. But yes, at the time it was odd, but then I grew to love that statement. In fact, I celebrate smallness and weakness now. But so I did have a relationship with the Lord as I was climbing that ladder and having that success. And some of the books that I did with some of the famous people, they did very well. And so it just kind of just kept producing a source of income and a source of all sorts of things. And so,
Joe, there was a kind of an aha moment that you spoke about or I read about, where Joe Weider, who at one point was still in the building and a part of what you were doing there, but he had changed over the years, right?
correct. So thank you for bringing that up. It wasn't too far into the time there, maybe halfway through, I would imagine. But I see Joe Weider walking from his office down the hall now. And it's interesting. I was editing articles and we were so busy. And then I look across the hall and I see Joe, and he's got his aide, the nurse, with him, and he's got a walker, and he's
Hmm.
struggling down the hallway. And he literally passes right in front of this statue of himself, this bronze statue of himself. It's just really, it's this bust, and he's got his arms are folded and his chin is up, and here it is. And I think I've said before that I saw two bookends of the same man in the same shot, and it jolted me like, what am I doing? And life is not about the body. And I felt like a counterfeit bill in that room, in my editing room. Seeing Joe in that moment had a huge impact on me. And it wasn't long after that I reached out to Louis and said, man, I've got to do something that's deeper. And
Yeah.
so yeah, so that's how that started.
Well, so that is so cool that you are kind of coming to grips with the fact, here you are at the top of your game, and coming to the grips with the fact that you were not fully fulfilled at that point. But I guess what really changed things was where the second mountain comes in. Yeah. And that is kind of where we transition to next. But uh, in that moment, everything was riding good. Um, but then there was kind of this switch. What happened at that point?
We had launched Prayfit, and we put in fact, I packaged about a year's worth of devotions into a book,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
found a small publisher, and published that book. And that book did really well because some friends went on, I didn't even ask them, but they went on national TV shows during their movie releases and mentioned us on the Tonight Show and on CNN and you name it. So Prayfit was blowing up. That book went number one. And then I got a call from Lionsgate Entertainment, and they wanted to do a DVD deal back in the day when there were what's called DVDs.
Okay. Yeah.
They put our DVDs in Walmart. I actually had a DVD next to Jane Fonda, and it was like Jane Fonda, The Biggest Loser, and then Prayfit right there. It was surreal. But now that I look back on it, it just feels so ancient to think about. But
The premise of that book was you can praise God by honoring his temple and make health and fitness being the premise by which you are glorifying God, correct?
that's right. And so if I look back, I used life is not about the body, but our health is a means of praise. And I still to a certain degree believe that. I mean, there's a lot of things that I've said that I would never say, if that makes any sense. There's a lot of things that I've done that I would never do. There's a lot of things that I've written that I would never write today. In fact, that one of those books, I do cringe sometimes when I think back or I see something or I reference something in an old book of mine. I do cringe. I'll get into that, but I do cringe a little bit of what I would say about faith and fitness and taking care of our health to glorify God. And if I'm being completely like brutal transparent in this moment, I wonder how much I was trying to glorify the Lord. I get the idea that I'm taking care of my health, glorify the Lord, but really I was probably more trying to glorify me and make money and do good for my wife. And yes, I see it as a means of praise, but I wonder how many times that was really true and pure. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I know the Lord knows my heart. And it's one of those things where I'm not real sure. It wasn't until later on that I think I praised the Lord more in times of suffering than I think I did in times of good health. But yes, to answer your question, the first early days of Prayfit were very much filled and laced with goodness and trying to take care of ourselves and educate people to take care of their bodies and eat right. So absolutely.
And you got to say that God doesn't make mistakes. He was at that point in the Jimmy Pena story, he was creating this platform. Mm-hmm. So later on, and we're going to get into the second mountain here in just a minute, but you needed that platform to make a voice, to be heard. And that was, I think, as Jimmy Pena 1.0 is, that was where God was taking you.
Yeah, I do think that the Lord was in it, and I do believe that he used me in certain ways, and I'm so grateful because I do, even to this day, I do think that we can, as a society, sometimes maybe we will diminish the importance of bodily stewardship. And so in that time, I was really trying to help believers, help the church, help, who would ever listen, that, hey, listen, we can take care of ourselves in a good, wholesome way so that we can better serve the Lord, honor him, take care of our families. And so I tried. It's very difficult. There's this balance of honoring God with your body. I can't promote vanity and sell modesty. And so there's this, like, how do I sell the product to take care without showing the results, which it was always this fine line that we always tried to walk. And I know that the Lord was there with me in that we tried to really take care of that line and not be showy, at the same time, educate. And so it was a constant, one of those constant battles. And I think the Lord was in there with us. He's directing us in that regard.
Yeah, the fine line is, do you treat this fitness thing as your idol, as your God, as opposed to glorify God?
Yeah. Just like money, we're you don't have to be healthy in order to honor God with your body any more than you have to be rich to honor him with your money. It's a hard issue. It's a heart issue. And I think, I hope and pray that those early days of Prayfit were seen that way and they were received that way. And so I can only hope that would be the case.
Yeah. But let's leave the first mountain, because the second mountain is where you're at now. You're still climbing the second mountain. And that came about in a rather tragic way.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. Walk us through the suffering.
After the second book, actually after the first book into the DVD deal, I was enduring some really tough physical issues. A couple of the issues I was having, it's one of the things you don't talk about at parties, but I was suffering from a couple things. I have a debilitating spinal issue. And so I was losing spinal discs of the neck. I was losing spinal discs of my lower back, just a genetic disc disease. But I was also having colon trouble. And so, long story short, I went through some really, really tough surgeries, multiple surgeries. Pretty much took me out of the fitness game, took me off the road. I couldn't travel with clients to write their books. I definitely couldn't like train in any way. So really just hit super, super hard physically. And so my life really changed when it comes to fitness publishing, fitness mindset, the grit and the guts. And so my world was turned upside down. And a lot of the things that I would teach individuals, even just in mindset, I was incapable of grabbing hold of. And I started to question a lot of things that I used to teach and a lot of things I used to say. But I realized really quickly that you don't always get what you work for. My neck was replaced with artificial discs,
Oh my gosh.
and then the two discs that were removed from the lower back, and I had this colon spasm. I won't go into it, but I had a very risky surgery. If I didn't have the surgery, who knows? But I chose the surgery, and there was a chance, a very high chance of that I would always have the colostomy bag, and just life altering situation for me.
Was this all happening in an instant? I mean, with the neck thing and all of that, or was it kind of slowly coming on and you recognized it over time?
The tough stuff really started happening in 2010, and so from 2010 through 2013 were the surgeries and the home bound, and I just couldn't move, and it was really tough. I'm really learning and fighting through and really getting to know myself, really getting to know who I was and who I wasn't. So it was a 16-week recovery from the colon surgery. Met with the doctor, and he said that things were coming back and I was going to be able to function somewhat normally. I was able to get out of the house after a few months. And my wife said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to go see a movie. I want to go see Batman: The Dark Knight Rises." And it's so funny I mentioned that, but it had such an impact on my life. In that movie, Bruce Wayne breaks his back, and he's in prison, and he has to get out of this hole in the ground. And the first thing he does when he gets out of this prison is he throws a rope to get other people that are captive out. And and I'm very mental and I'm emotional and I'm sentimental. I thought that's exactly what I'm going to do. If I heal up and if I get out of this, I'm going to help others through their tough pain, through
Oh
their
my.
suffering. And
Oh my.
so Second Mountain kind of began when the Lord allowed that healing after that last colon surgery. And so I said, you know what? Times have changed. Prayfit's going in a different direction. And it's so funny too, because at the same time, over those years, I started to serve in our local special needs disabilities department on the weekends with my wife. And so I was falling in love with the disability community and kids with special needs. And then at the same time, going through some really tough stuff of my own. And this whole thing just kind of hit all at once. And I said, this is the direction that I'm going to take Prayfit and any of the publishing that I do. And so we started dedicating Prayfit to the kids and parents of impacted by special needs. And so the Second Mountain kind of began right after that moment. In fact, it wasn't too long after that I was talking to a gentleman at a disability center based here in Los Angeles called Johnny and Friends. And I know you're familiar with Johnny Erickson Tada. And this fine individual said he had asked me about my history and resume, and he was looking at it, and I've read off a few of the things that we had done, and he had seen. He actually had one of my books on his bookshelf, and he says, Jimmy, you've got all of these things that you've done. Well, he asked me, he says, what would life look like if things turned out well for you? And I was like, what? I'm trying not to take it as, oh, wow. But it was such a genius move on his part. He says, you've done all of these really huge things and you've had the success, but what would life look like for you in the second half if things actually produced? And I'm like, oh my goodness, it's so good. And what he was getting to, and he actually alluded to, the book called The Second Half. I think it's what it was called.
Oh,
And
all right.
he kind of referenced this whole idea of like the next chapter, the second mountain.
Yeah.
And he said service, and he was teaching me so well. He was like, service is really the byproduct of that grace and that gift of whatever we can do. And I'm like, yes, this is, you're so right. And I had to answer him now. And if I'm looking back, things will turn out right if I'm serving people with whatever level of health I have, or good or bad. The byproduct of that is service and a humility and like almost an invisibility to it. Yeah. So the second half of the second mountain really propelled us into getting involved with Johnny and Friends. I was able to help their ministry on the West Coast. In fact, I traveled to a few international spots like Brazil to distribute wheelchairs for people that don't have the gift of mobility and they don't have the gospel. And so I really saw through Johnny and Friends real service, real sacrifice. And with Johnny herself, I mean, truly, Johnny Erickson Tata, for those that don't know, she's she's the most remarkable woman you'll ever meet or read about. But she's been quadriplegic for over 5 decades, and she has dedicated her life to serving the Lord through wheelchair distribution and Bibles and respite care all around the world. And she can't move anything below her neck.
Oh my. Yeah.
It's so funny too, because I came to LA to serve Joe Weider, and he was the best at showing muscle. And yet Johnny Erickson Tata can't move a one. And like, she has done more to honor God with her body than I ever could dream about doing it in the most grueling of workouts or the most dedicated diets and the faith and fitness syndrome. No, I mean, watching someone like her do what she does is completely life changing. She is the gospel in motion. She is.
Someone quoted, and I can't remember who it was. I think it was in your book. Said in your most recent book, she said that she was the closest thing to Jesus on earth that he'd ever met. Right?
Yes. He said, I don't want to elevate, Johnny or lower Christ, but she is as close to Jesus as you'll ever meet. And you know what? He is spot on. And I don't think anyone who knows her or knows her story would actually, refute, disagree with that.
And we kind of blazed by your own personal suffering, and I don't want to get into the depths of it too much, but I don't want to under tell that story either, because your personal suffering was long term over a period of time. You were at a point where you didn't know that it was ever going to come around. So it was in some ways a bit hopeless, a bit depressing. Did you ever ask or wonder what God had in store for you through all of that?
Absolutely, I did. In fact, there was some dark moments. And in fact, I think I may have mentioned it in the book Finding Respite, that I was lying in a bathtub of my own making, full of blood and waste and urine and you name it. And here I was, this fitness guy, thinking he's something years ago, and I had success, I had money, I had you name it, and here I am in a bathtub. I'm sweating, and I'm turn the music up so nothing can be heard outside, and you talk about low, like really low. I knew that if I'm going to get out of this stage of my life, it will absolutely only be by the grace of God if I am able to make it. And so it was really scary and tough. And I really thought life as I knew it, or I knew life as I knew it was over, but I didn't know if life was over. I really thought it was haunting. And I think that's why I still I beat the drum in my own heart more than ever. And publicly, I hope that anything, it's all a gift. I never would have felt that closeness to the Lord had I not gotten sick and had I not gone through such tough times. I know it. And I'm not saying that we're not close to the Lord when we're super healthy and super fit. And I'm not saying that at all. I believe that we can be, but I do know for certain that nothing will drive you to the Lord like suffering.
Well, that was one of the things out of the book. So I'm going to name the book here again because my producer, my editor always says, well, you talk about the book and then you never say the name of the book. So it's
Finding respite.
finding respite. And the tag to that is when faith and fitness meet grace in suffering. And in that book, which is a short book, it's only 100 pages, and I absolutely recommend everybody pick that up, but especially anybody that's in that phase of their life where they are suffering. But one of the things that I thought of as I'm reading this book, and I'm hearing your story, I'm hearing you tell Johnny's story. There's somebody in the book named Kevin, and his story, and I almost am saying to myself, God, I guess I until I'm suffering, I'm not going to be as close to the Lord as these folks are. But what you're saying right there is not so much. It's one way or the other, and the God works in the way He chooses.
I do hope that maybe especially the younger generation coming up in the fitness world or what have you, or even the seemingly stronger middle-aged men and women out there, get involved with those that are going through the tough stuff of life. Now while you're fit and healthy and still able, get involved, get plugged in. In fact, part of the book, I say that suffering breaks us, suffering shapes us, and ultimately suffering sends us. And that's very true. It doesn't always work out that way. Suffering in many ways, it did bring out in me some character flaw. It really it highlighted some of my character flaws, my weak mind, it really exposed my lack of faith. It exposes so much, and it kind of gets those things out in the open to where you can deal with them with the Lord and others that you love. And so you grow from those times of suffering. But but you don't have to go through suffering. And personally, to engage in it that way, that's why I say, get involved with the disability community, get involved with those that are suffering and going through tough stuff, and your life will change for the better. And the Lord may open up your eyes to some other ways of living. Because I think we can get so, hey, I'm gonna do these things. I'm gonna stay healthy. I'm gonna take care of myself. And but I think if we can, extend outward into the hurting communities, even while we're healthy and fit, we can make such a huge difference on others and as much on yourself as well.
So somewhere you said this is going to be your last book, and and I said I don't think so. I don't think so. Was that the idea that this would be your last book? Or do you remember even saying that? Maybe.
Hey, it may be, but you never know. I do get inspired. I'm always jotting things down and ideas down. So you never know.
So thank you so much, Jimmy. You have been just an inspiration, and you are such a bundle of energy and enthusiasm. And I just can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this conversation.
Oh, I've had so much fun. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been awesome. I really appreciate you.
How cool is that? Jimmy Pena. This is a guy who has so much amazing wisdom to offer, and we will continue to follow his journey as he makes waves for Jesus. We haven't heard the last of this guy yet. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this awesome story. Hopefully, you will find more about him and his ministry with his book or his website, and to continue to support him in all of the things he's doing for people with special needs and their families. Until next time, God bless.